Welcome back to ZARA Revenge, where karma always finds its way. This is the story of a father who was humiliated at his daughter's rehearsal dinner, until the truth turned the entire room silent. The Azure Point Club sparkled with chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes. The air smelled like expensive wine and fake laughter. Every guest wore elegance on their sleeves, designer suits, diamond earrings, polished shoes, and in the doorway stood Victor, calloused hands, dusty boots, and a faded construction jacket. He looked out of place, like a crack in a flawless mirror. It was his daughter's rehearsal dinner. Aria, his only child. His world. His reason for every sacrifice. "We only want important people at our celebration," he said. Julian Vance, Aria's fiancé, spotted him first. His confident grin faded into discomfort. He whispered something to Aria, then walked toward Victor like a man about to deal with an inconvenience. "Julian." "Victor," he said softly, not meeting my eyes. "We only want important people at our celebration. I'm sure you understand." The room went silent. Laughter died mid-sentence. Victor looked at him for a long time, the kind of long silence that carries 25 years of sacrifice. Dusty boots, calloused hands, a lifetime of work that built more than houses. It built character. Victor smiled. "Interesting," he said. "Let me back up and tell you how we got here. 25 years ago, I made a decision that would change everything." He was 27, fresh out of college with a business degree. He'd just inherited $43,000 from his grandfather. Not a fortune, but enough to build something. Most would have bought suits and gone corporate. But Victor? He bought a pickup truck and work boots. He wanted his daughter to grow up knowing what earned money felt like, not what it smelled like from a silver spoon. I wanted my daughter to understand the weight of a dollar, the dignity of honest work, the difference between earning respect and demanding it, and that was the start of Sterling Construction. Just one truck, one man, one dream. He swung hammers by day and read business law books by night. He wore the same jacket every day, the one that smelled of sweat and sawdust. People saw a laborer, never a businessman. But while they judged his boots, he was signing deals that would build empires. The first year, $62,000. The second, $98,000. By the third, $500,000. And yet, he stayed in his one-bedroom apartment. He cooked instant noodles, skipped vacations, and saved every dime. Because he wasn't just building a business. He was building a future for Aria. She was 2 when her mother passed away. It was just us, me and her against the world. Julian was still standing there, waiting for Victor to turn around and leave. "Julian, are you still here?" Victor didn't move. He just looked at him, like a man who had already seen the ending of this story. And quietly he said, "I am. But you'll wish I wasn't." Welcome back to ZARA Revenge, where karma always finds its way. Today's episode continues the story of a father humiliated at his daughter's rehearsal dinner. But little did they know, the man in dusty boots owned the ground beneath their feet. If you love stories where revenge serves cold, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because this one's about to get powerful. Victor stood motionless in the doorway, the laughter and whispers fading behind him. The servers hesitated, unsure if they should offer him a drink or escort him out. Julian's words still echoed through the room. "We only want important people at our celebration." Victor's eyes moved across the tables. Champagne flutes glimmering. People pretending not to stare. Aria trying to mask her embarrassment. She looked beautiful, but her smile was uneasy, trembling slightly at the edges. He'd seen that expression before, when she was 6 and didn't want him to pick her up from school in his muddy truck. Back then, he'd laughed it off. But tonight, it stung. The moment you realize your child is ashamed of you, and it's a kind of pain you can't build walls against. No hammer, no tool, no success prepares you for that. Julian cleared his throat, adjusting his designer tie, trying to reassert control. "Julian." "Victor, I understand you probably didn't know this was a formal event. It's fine. Maybe you can join us later." That tone, the one polite people use when they want to make you disappear. Victor simply nodded. "I understand, Julian, perfectly." He turned to leave, but his mind was already replaying every moment that led to this night. Victor's alarm rang at 4:45 a.m. The small house smelled of coffee and sawdust. He kissed a framed photo of his late wife before heading out. He was running 3 crews by then, driving from one construction site to another. coordinating deliveries, managing payrolls, cutting deals with developers who underestimated him because of his boots. Funny thing about hard work, it builds more than buildings. It builds patience. It builds strategy. It builds power. The quiet kind that doesn't need to shout. He started Sterling Development soon after. Real estate flips, housing complexes, small commercial projects. Every year the numbers doubled. But he never changed his appearance. Never upgraded the truck. Never traded his flannel shirts for Armani suits. He wanted to remain invisible. Because invisibility gave him an edge. People revealed everything when they thought you didn't matter. She sat at the kitchen table, legs swinging, doing homework. Arya, Daddy, why don't we live in one of the big houses you build? Victor smiled, gently tapping her nose. Because, sweetheart, we don't need big houses to have big hearts. She didn't understand then. But she would, someday. Victor stepped out of the dining room and leaned against the hallway wall. Through the glass doors, he could see the club logo etched in gold. The Azure Point Club, owned by Sterling Holdings. He smiled to himself. Julian didn't know what Sterling Holdings was. Neither did Arya. I built it that way, quietly, carefully. I wanted Arya to love people for who they were, not what they had. But maybe I went too far. Maybe she forgot that wealth can wear dusty boots too. He pulled out his phone and opened a message thread labeled Board and Sterling Holdings. His message was simple. Club reservation under Arya Sterling. Confirm billing to personal account. I'll attend the event myself. A reply appeared instantly. Of course, Mr. Sterling, anything you need? Victor smiled. No, not yet, he whispered. But soon. Dinner was underway. The guests clinked glasses. Julian gave a short speech about family, success, and future ambitions. Every word dripped with ego. Victor quietly entered again, this time unnoticed, standing near the bar. He watched his daughter, radiant but distracted. Her eyes darted toward him occasionally, guilt flickering. Then Julian's next line froze the room. Julian, raising glass. And thank you to everyone here, our friends, our family, and those who've helped shape who we are today. We only surround ourselves with people who inspire success and share our vision of refinement. Refinement. That word again, polished, cold, dismissive. Victor clenched his jaw but said nothing. You can't buy refinement, Julian. You can only fake it, and fakes always crack under pressure. Julian finished his speech and sat down, smirking at Arya's uncertain expression. Moments later, a club manager entered, whispering something into Julian's ear. His face stiffened. Manager quietly. Sir, Mr. Victor Sterling's tab has been confirmed by the club owner. All charges tonight will be billed under his personal corporate account. Julian blinked. The owner. Wait, Victor Sterling? That can't be right. The manager nodded. It's in our records, sir. Julian turned slowly toward the bar. Victor stood there, calm, composed, watching him. Their eyes met. And for the first time that night, Julian didn't know what to say. Victor walked forward, every step deliberate. Don't worry, Julian. You wanted important people here tonight. He leaned closer, his voice steady but sharp. Now you've got one. Julian's smirk collapsed. Arya's fork slipped from her hand, and the entire room fell silent. The crystal chandelier shimmered as though holding its breath. Every fork, every glass, every whisper had frozen midair. Julian stood there, pale, his hand tightening around his champagne glass. Arya's eyes darted between them, her voice trembling. Arya. Dad, what's going on? Victor looked around the room slowly, at the guests pretending to check their phones, at the servers who'd stopped pouring wine, at Julian's parents whispering nervously. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Victor. Nothing, sweetheart. Your fiancé just reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Who the important people in my life really are. Julian forced a laugh, his tone brittle. Julian. Victor, this is obviously some kind of misunderstanding. You're saying you own this club? Victor. No, Julian. I own the company that owns it. A wave of murmurs rippled across the tables. Guests turned their heads, whispering his name as though trying to remember where they'd heard it before. Victor walked toward the center of the room, his boots tapping softly on the marble floor. I spent half my life in silence, working while others were speaking, building while others were pretending. And now in one sentence that silence was broken. It was a rainy night in Dallas. Victor sat alone in his office. Blueprints, invoices and contracts scattered across his desk. Sterling Development had just landed a $12 million deal. He stared at the numbers and then at a framed photo of little Aria holding a toy hammer. I'd done it. I'd built an empire from dirt and sweat. But money wasn't the reward, and it was proof. Proof that sacrifice wasn't for nothing. He'd created Sterling Holdings, a parent company that quietly absorbed construction, development, and property management firms across 3 states. It owned apartment complexes, malls, and yes, the Azure Point Club. But he never told Aria. She grew up believing her dad was a hard-working construction man, not a multi-millionaire developer. He'd wanted her love, not her admiration. Julian laughed nervously. Julian, come on, Victor. You expect us to believe... Before he could finish, the club manager returned, holding a file. Manager, Mr. Sterling, sir. We've processed tonight's event billing under your personal Sterling Holdings account. Would you like us to continue hosting, or would you prefer to make other arrangements? The guests gasped. The silence deepened. Victor looked at the manager. Victor, carry on. Tonight's a celebration and for my daughter. Then he turned to Julian. You were saying? Julian stammered. I didn't realize. Victor tilted his head. Didn't realize that the man you tried to embarrass built the floor you're standing on. Julian's face flushed red. Victor stepped closer, his voice quiet but cutting. You saw dirt on my boots, Julian. What you didn't see was the foundation under them. Aria stood trembling. Aria. Dad, why didn't you ever tell me? All this time. Victor softened instantly. His expression gentled as he reached for her hand. Because, sweetheart, I didn't want you to love me for what I had. I wanted you to understand what it takes to earn it. Tears welled in her eyes. I do, Dad, I do now. Julian's father tried to interrupt. Mr. Vance. Victor, let's not turn this into a scene. We're all family here. Victor's gaze snapped to him. Family. You didn't treat me like family when your son called me unimportant. You treated me like a stain on your dinner napkin. The older man fell silent. Victor turned to the crowd, voice firm but calm. You know what's funny? Every one of you here came dressed to impress. And yet not one of you could build what I've built with a single pair of hands. That's the difference between image and substance. A few guests looked away, embarrassed. Others nodded, slightly ashamed. Victor stood in the back row wearing his old jacket, watching his daughter walk across the stage. Everyone around him clapped and cheered. She waved, smiling proudly. I funded every step of her education, the tuition, the dorms, even the laptop she used to write her thesis. But she thought scholarships and her fiancé's family connections helped. That was fine with me. I wanted her to believe in her own strength. He smiled then, just as he smiled now, quietly from the corner of the crowd. Julian cleared his throat again, desperate to regain control. Julian. Victor, I think there's been a misunderstanding between us. I never meant any disrespect. Victor. You meant every word. And that's what makes this moment so perfect. He gestured around. You see, Julian, this room, this dinner, this entire club. Everything here exists because I believed in work more than appearances. You believed in appearances more than work. That's why you'll never be what I am. Julian's jaw tightened. And what exactly are you, Victor? Victor smiled, slow, measured, devastating. A builder. Of walls, of homes, of empires. And sometimes of lessons. The crowd murmured again, admiration replacing discomfort. Aria looked at Julian and her face full of disappointment. You said my father embarrassed you. But you just embarrassed yourself. Julian looked down, speechless. Victor placed a hand on her shoulder. Let's have dinner, sweetheart. The food's getting cold. Respect isn't about titles. It's about how you treat the person who has nothing to gain from you. Julian failed that test. He smiled faintly, raising his glass. To Aria, may she always remember where real worth comes from. The guests slowly began to clap, hesitant at first, then louder. Julian sat frozen, his pride crumbling like dust. The applause faded into uneasy silence. Guests whispered under their breath, eyes darting between Victor and Julian. The air was heavy, like the calm before a storm that everyone knew was coming. Julian tried to recover, adjusting his tie, forcing a grin that looked more like a grimace. He clinked his glass again. Everyone, let's continue dinner, shall we? But no one lifted a fork. They were waiting, watching, because everyone knew the story wasn't over. Victor sat beside Aria, his calm presence radiating authority. He didn't need to say another word. The silence did it for him. Then Julian's mother, Evelyn Vance, leaned forward. Her smile was sharp and artificial. "Mr. Sterling," she said sweetly, "we had no idea you were such an accomplished man. What a lovely surprise." Victor looked at her, his tone even. "Not a surprise, Mrs. Vance, just something you didn't bother to ask." Her smile froze. Julian's father cleared his throat, desperate to mend the awkward atmosphere. "Well, business or not, we're thrilled to welcome you into the family." Victor's gaze hardened. "I'm not sure there's going to be a family after tonight." Arya turned toward him, confused. "Dad, what do you mean?" Victor didn't answer immediately. He took a sip of water, his eyes fixed on Julian. "Maybe your fiancé should explain." Julian's face tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Victor leaned back, folding his arms. 3 weeks ago, one of my financial officers noticed something strange. A company named Vance Consulting had approached one of our subsidiaries and offering to optimize our investments. The proposal included access to proprietary contracts, internal development plans, and future property acquisitions. Arya frowned. "So?" Victor's voice dropped low, calm but sharp. "So, sweetheart, it wasn't a business proposal. It was an inside attempt to copy and underbid my future projects, led by your fiancé, Julian Vance." The color drained from Julian's face. "That's ridiculous," he said quickly. "I don't even handle consulting." Victor cut him off. "Maybe you should have used a different email domain before sending confidential copies of sterling blueprints to your cousin's firm." I traced the source. Gasps spread through the room. Someone at the far table whispered, "He tried to scam him?" Julian stood abruptly, his chair scraping the marble. "That's not true. You can't prove—" Victor reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. With a calm flick, he turned the screen toward Arya. "Recognize that?" It was a series of emails, Julian's name clear at the top. Arya's hand flew to her mouth. Her voice trembled. "Julian, you sent these?" He froze, the blood drained from his face. "Arya, listen to me." "No," she said, her voice cracking. "You lied to me." Victor set the phone down, his tone steady as steel. "You didn't just insult me, Julian. You used my daughter to get close to my company. Every dinner, every polite conversation on it was part of your act." Julian tried to speak, but his words tangled in panic. "It wasn't like that. I wanted us to have a future, Arya." "I wanted stability," Victor interrupted softly. "You wanted money." Julian's silence was answer enough. The guests were motionless. Some turned away, unable to watch the humiliation. Others stared in disbelief. Evelyn Vance reached for her son's arm. "Julian, sit down." "Stop this." But he didn't. He just stood there, cornered, sweating under the weight of his own lies. Victor rose slowly, his voice calm but thunderous in its certainty. "Julian Vance, I should have you escorted out. But I won't. Because I want my daughter to see what honesty looks like, and what deceit costs." He turned to Arya, his expression softening. "Sweetheart, I kept my wealth quiet so you could live freely. But freedom means nothing when the person beside you is a cage made of greed." Tears welled in Arya's eyes. She nodded slowly, realization breaking through heartbreak. She stood, turning to Julian. "Return the ring." Julian blinked. "What?" She extended her hand. "The engagement ring. It's over." He hesitated, his jaw trembling. "Arya, don't do this here." She didn't move. Her tone was steady. "Do it now." The entire room watched as Julian slipped the ring off her finger and placed it in her palm. The metallic clink of the diamond hitting her skin sounded louder than the music ever had. Victor's voice was quiet but final. "You told me I wasn't important, Julian. But now you know who decides who belongs in this room." Julian looked at him one last time, rage and humiliation burning behind his eyes, then turned and stormed out. Evelyn and Mr. Vance followed quickly, whispering frantic apologies no one cared to hear. For a long moment, silence filled the space. Only the soft music remained. Then Victor turned to the staff. "Let's continue dinner." A few hesitant laughs spread across the tables. Guests began to breathe again. Arya sat down beside him, wiping her tears. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't see it." Victor smiled gently. "You weren't supposed to. You trusted. That's a good thing, as long as you learn who's worth that trust." She nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. "I thought I was marrying the right man." He wrapped his arm around her. "You were. You just didn't know it yet." She looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" Victor smiled faintly. "You'll see." The camera would have lingered there, on father and daughter, the weight of truth between them, the glow of quiet dignity. But Victor's eyes drifted toward the door where Julian had left. His face hardened again. Some men learn lessons the easy way, others need to lose everything before they finally understand what they threw away. The air inside, the Azure Point Club's private dining room had gone thick. So thick, you could almost hear the silence. Every whisper stopped when Victor said the words, "In my country club." Julian's smirk vanished like spilled wine soaking into linen. His fiancée, Aria, stood frozen, her eyes darting between her father and her soon-to-be husband, trying to piece together what she'd just heard. Victor didn't flinch. He just kept looking around the room, at the chandeliers, the polished silverware, the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, people who thought they were somebody. "Julian. Wait, your country club?" Victor calmly. "That's right. Sterling Holdings owns this property, along with the golf course, the restaurant downstairs, and the 5 luxury condos across the lake." He stepped forward, his dusty boots echoing against the marble floor, each step reminding everyone that the man they had looked down on carried more power in those work-worn hands than all of them combined. "Victor, so when you said you only wanted important people here, Julian, you might want to check the guest list again." Aria's breath hitched. She turned toward her fiancé, her voice trembling. "Aria. Julian, you told me my dad couldn't afford to be here. You said we should have the dinner somewhere more appropriate." Julian's jaw tightened. "Julian. Aria, I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said. You saw my hands, you saw my truck, and you assumed less than. That's fine, Julian. You're not the first man to mistake quiet success for poverty." He paused, letting his words settle like dust after demolition. "The truth is, I built my fortune stone by stone, nail by nail, handshake by handshake. Not from fancy degrees or trust funds, but from showing up before sunrise and leaving after everyone else. And tonight I was finally done hiding what that sacrifice had built." The club manager, a man in a navy blazer, approached nervously. "Manager, Mr. Sterling, is everything all right, sir?" Julian blurting out. "Sir? You call him sir?" The manager looked puzzled. "Manager, of course Mr. Sterling owns this property." The room gasped. Forks clattered against plates. A woman whispered, "He owns the place." Another murmured, "That's Aria's father?" Julian's face drained of color. He turned to Aria, desperate. "Julian, you didn't tell me—" Aria, cutting him off. "I didn't know. You never even let him talk long enough to tell us anything." She looked at her father, her eyes shimmering with guilt. "Aria!" "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me?" Victor smiled. That same warm, tired smile he'd worn all her life. "Victor, because I wanted you to see the world without a price tag, sweetheart. I wanted you to know the worth of people, not their wallets." He turned back to Julian, who now looked small, shrinking under the weight of his own arrogance. "Victor, Julian, I've been patient. I've listened to your subtle insults and your fake politeness. But when you humiliated me at my own daughter's celebration, that crossed a line." Julian opened his mouth to speak, but Victor raised a hand. "Don't, you've already said enough." He nodded to the manager. "Mr. Reed, cancel the Vance family's membership. Effective immediately." Gasps again. Someone dropped a glass. Julian took a step forward. Julian, desperate. "You can't just—" Victor cutting him off. "I can, and I just did." The manager nodded solemnly and walked away. Aria stood frozen, eyes wide, tears forming. "Aria." "Dad, I don't know what to say." Victor smiled and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "Then don't. Just remember, never judge a person by the dirt on their hands. Some of the cleanest hearts wear the dirtiest boots." He turned to leave, but stopped halfway to the door. Victor, over his shoulder. "Oh, and Julian, congratulations. You just lost the best thing that ever happened to you." He walked out, the sound of his boots fading down the hall, leaving behind a room full of people who would never again underestimate a man who worked with his hands. As I stepped outside, the night air hit me. Cool, honest, clean. I didn't need applause or recognition. The truth had finally spoken for itself. He looked back through the glass doors one last time. Aria was standing there, wiping tears, watching him leave. Their eyes met, and for the first time, She saw him not as the man in the boots, but as the father who built her world from the ground up. Victor smiled softly and walked toward his old pickup truck, its headlights glowing like old friends. Victor's truck rumbled to life, the same old Ford he'd been driving for 2 decades. Its engine sounded rough but reliable, like him. The headlights cut through the night as he pulled away from the Azure Point Club, leaving behind the glittering building full of shocked guests and a silent daughter trying to process everything that had just unfolded. The city lights blurred in his mirrors, but the memories, those stayed sharp. You know, people always say money changes you. Maybe it does. But what I've learned is that hiding it changes you too. I spent years pretending to be less so my daughter could grow up humble. Turns out humility doesn't come from what you have, it comes from what you value. He stopped at a red light. Across the street, a young man in a construction vest crossed the road, laughing with a coworker. For a moment, Victor saw his younger self, sweaty, tired, but proud. He smiled. That man had dreams, big ones. He didn't know they'd cost him so much. A week later, Victor sat at his kitchen table sipping coffee from a chipped mug. The morning sun spilled across the counter, lighting up old family photos. Aria's graduation, her first bike, her mother's smiling face. Then came the knock. He hesitated, then opened the door. Aria stood there, eyes red but determined. She wasn't dressed in designer clothes this time. Just jeans, a sweater, and the look of someone who'd finally seen the truth. Aria, Dad, can we talk? Victor nodded and stepped aside. She walked in, clutching a small envelope. Aria, softly. I broke off the engagement. Victor exhaled slowly. He'd expected it, but hearing her say it still hit deep. Victor, I'm sorry it ended like that, sweetheart. Aria, shaking her head. No, Dad, I'm not. You were right about him. About everything. I was so blinded by what looked successful, I forgot to see what real success looks like. Victor sat quietly, letting her speak. Aria, through tears. You built everything from nothing, and you did it with integrity. And I treated you like you were less than the people who wear fancy suits. I'm so sorry. Victor reached across the table and took her hand. Victor, gently. Aria, there's nothing to be sorry for. You just learned what I spent half my life trying to teach you. Respect isn't earned by money. It's earned by how you treat people.